Hey guys, today we're going to be installing the Akebono Big Brake Kit on our 350Z. So one of the things you want to look out for when you are thinking about adding a big brake kit is clearance. So we have these 19-inch Vossen wheels, and you can see that we have quite a bit of clearance, but however, right here, we don't have a ton. So if you're just looking at the wheel like this, you're like, oh, I have tons of space. You have to remember, not every wheel is manufactured the same. So just because you have an 18 or a 19, you think it's going to fit an 18 is going to be very close on these vehicles. You're way better off in terms of clearance with a 19 in order to clear the caliper from the front brakes. There are two other items that I really recommend that you guys get if you're trying to get more stopping power out of the car. Now, if you're just doing the big brake setup because you want to deal with heat and more for looks, you technically don't have to get this stuff. But if you want to have as best of a brake feel and power technically, then you have to get these parts. So here is the Z1 Motorsports brake brace. If you watch my video on it, you can actually see it. Go to your car right now. If you don't have this installed, get someone to push as hard on the brake as they can. You'll actually see the master move. The reason why it moves is because the firewall is just really not that strong on these cars. So what they've done is they have built this brace that doesn't take long to install at all. You can see it mounts over here. It looks beautiful. And it holds up against the master. And then when you apply a strong brake force, a big brake application, it holds everything in place, and that's what really helps get the brake pedal feel. On top of, if you have fixed rotors or fixed calipers, you're gonna have a really nice brake pedal feel, but this is the first step to getting it. The other major component would be the stainless steel braided brake lines. Now for the flex lines, typically it's rubber. Now this is still technically a soft material inside, but the stainless steel braid helps it keep the same diameter as it gets hot. So if you were driving on a cold morning and you just started the car and your brake lines are factory but they're in really good condition, they probably won't feel too different. However, on a really hot summer day and you've been driving for hours, that material might want to expand, and what this does is, especially on those track days, it helps keep the same diameter, helping you maintain the same brake pedal feel. So instead of the line expanding and giving you a mushy pedal feel, it's staying the same diameter and all that force is going to the caliper. And the brake pads we're using are just the regular ceramic Akebono replacements. So before doing this job, we obviously have to secure the vehicle up in the air. So we have jack stands. In the back, I do have my floor jack. I have jack stands on support beams of the vehicle. And even though our Vossens are really expensive, I would rather have them under the car in case something were to go wrong and damage these than hurt myself. Also, we're just going to use some used cardboard underneath here because to do this job, to make things easier, we're going to release the brake lines. That way we're completely free of the calipers because we have to remove the calipers anyways, but then we don't have to deal with them being attached to the vehicle. Now I'm going to be taking off the caliper in one assembly, so you guys can either take off these guide pins if you have the floating calipers and take out the pads, or then you can take out the caliper and then you can take out the caliper bracket. I'm just going to take it off as one assembly. So there are two bolts on here. Now I did break these loose last year because last year you guys saw me modify the dust shields. So it wasn't that hard. I just had open-ended wrenches and then a rubber mallet, and I was able to break it loose. So these bolts don't come out too hard. Now, if you've never taken these caliper bracket bolts off, a really good idea is to hit it with a bunch of penetrating lube the night before you start the job, and you might want to have some impact tools on hand if you have air or electric. Now, down here, it is quite hard to get a tool in here, so you might have to disassemble a little bit more of the suspension to get it out. In my case, I don't have to, so I can go ahead and use hand tools, not a big deal. The nice thing about the 350 is the parking brake is not built into the caliper. It's actually a drum assembly in the disc, so you don't have to deal with too much when we're doing the swap. Now, because we serviced this before, it's a little bit easier to deal with. parking brakes off, make sure, because you will not be able to remove the rotor if you do so. So we have gone ahead in here before and we've cleaned it. So if you haven't done so before, use a bunch of brake clean. You can even put a little bit of grease in here. I wouldn't really recommend it because it's spinning so much that if you put anti-seize in here, what's going to happen is going to fling over time, and then it's going to get in the drum, and you're not going to be able to have your parking brake actually grab on that well. So this is one of the few times I really don't recommend putting anti-seize grease, but do take the time to do a good cleaning in here before you put it all back together. So you guys can see our dust shield has been modified, and you refer to our previous video, but you can see here we've clearanced this area top and bottom, and we bent it back. One, we wanted to try to feed it more air. I don't know if it's going to do anything, but also we get a lot more clearance because the rears of the calipers just do bolt right in, but the dust shield gets in the way. Also, your new rotors are going to be much bigger than here, so they are going to go past the dust shield. It's okay, it's not going to affect anything. And then you want to make sure, again, inspect everything and making adjustments on the parking brake if you need to. So I wanted you guys to check this out. This is the original rotor. So its diameter is roughly about 12 inches. Now, why do I have two? You guys saw me machine this one before. Now, this is the problem with buying used. This is actually not the correct rotor. One, the inside diameter of the parking brake hat or the drum is roughly about 7.5. The factory one is 6 3/4. So it's off by quite a bit. Also, this rotor over here is 13 3/4, while this one is, well, actually the diameter is the same, but the only thing that changed here is the size for our parking brake assembly, and I was maxing out the adjuster thinking I was doing something wrong. I actually had the wrong part, so buyer beware when you're buying used. So I had to go buy new rotors. I got a good discount on it, but I did have to go spend some more money. Well, since I've been messing around with the adjuster so much, I'm just taking the time to take it apart, inspect it, and grease it so it doesn't seize up on me. There is lots of grease in here anyways, but I figure just take the time and inspect it at the very least so we can go ahead and put this thing back together and get it done right. So if you guys need to change out your parking brake assembly, now is kind of the time to do so. And now I can go ahead and do my readjustment. Now, if your parking brake assembly is in good condition, you could just go ahead and put this whole thing back together. It's not a big, I would just hit with some brake cleaner, because how often do you guys actually take off these rotors unless you're doing a replacement? So now I have to clean it off again, readjust it again where I actually need it to be. So you have to learn from my mistakes. Like, I did a bunch of extra work that I didn't have to, mainly because I made a bunch of adjustments that didn't need to be made, but because we picked the wrong parts, we were trying to compensate for it without even realizing. So at least you guys know now, if there is something wrong with how things are spec'd, you shouldn't have to adjust it out that far. Like, I should have just been able to put them back on and I would have had a parking brake, but I learned my lesson. Okay, once you got everything inspected, cleaned off, you put your rotor on. So there's a little bit of friction, so you want to make sure that it can spin pretty free once you got your rotor on and you've cleaned it with brake cleaner. You're going to clean it again afterwards, but there is an anti-corrosion material that they put on because you don't know how long they're going to be stored for, and these are machined from factory, so they don't want it to rust, so keep that in mind when you are dealing with new rotors. You can go ahead and put our caliper on. So I like to put a little bit of thread lock on there. If you're seeing that red, that's not red thread lock. That is the red paint from previously installing them because we painted and there's some overspray inside the caliper. I wouldn't recommend red on this application. It's very permanent, and if you're not going to do your brakes that often, not depending on how much you guys track your car and daily use it, so blue is going to be enough. Now, blue also will lubricate, so you can argue it either way. If you use blue Loctite, and it acts like a lubricant, it's going to be hard when you torque it down to specification because it'll technically be inaccurate because it acts like a lubricant. So I'll let you guys decide if you want to use Loctite or not. So I'm just tightening up and snugging up the calipers, and then we can finish installing our pads. I'll show you guys how to do the front. It's a little bit easier to get a better camera angle, so we're just going to speed up. So we're just reverse the process. 2 bolts though. No more guide pins. Well, not the same as a floating caliper, at least. There are still pins. You still have to inspect, lubricate. It's just a little bit different. You might want to buy some extra cotter pins or whatever, in case you lose them. They are very small, so you don't hang up your job because of that. There is a tool we'll show you as well that helps spread the pistons and the calipers so you don't wreck your finish. Because I know a lot of times you want to grab a C-clamp or some sort of clamp to push the pistons in. There is a tool that goes on the inside. So we're just snugging this up for now. Okay, so you got your pistons pushed out, so you can go ahead and put in your pad. Now we can put in our titanium plate. We did already grease it up, just where it makes contact. And I greased up these pins as well. Pin goes through the hole, over the other bracket, through the other hole. So that's in, and then you just have to put your cotter pin in after you get these guys in, because they will want to back themselves out. One tip I would have for you guys before you get too deep and hook up your brake lines and everything and start bleeding, I would double check the operation of your parking brake. So just release the parking brake, be able to turn it by hand very smoothly. You will hear some friction from the pads, but it shouldn't have that much resistance, especially when everything is new. And then apply the parking brake and you should not be able to move it. So if you apply the parking brake and you're not getting any action from your parking brake, you either have to make an adjustment, or like you might have a situation like I did where this outside diameter was the exact same, but the drum itself inside was the wrong diameter, throwing everything off. So double check these things, because like you might not even think about it. You know, everything goes smoothly, you bleed everything, and then all of a sudden you have to take it all apart and either change parts or make an adjustment. Our rears are now finished. Now, sorry I wasn't able to do it step by step and showing everything, but I'm going to show you in depth how to do the front, because we can actually turn the wheel more towards the camera. You see now we have pads on both sides now, and then we have all our hardware put in place. Everything's all greased up. So let's go ahead and do the fronts. Okay, so we're going to do the front. So the first thing to start off with is we're going to remove the brake lines. So get a container to catch everything. Preferably you guys wear gloves. Get over here. So I already run stainless steel braided brake lines from Stop Tech, which is nice. So the banjo bolts on this car are already short, but I did get new crush washers, but we're always going to keep our crush washers just in case, but I highly recommend you run new ones. So we're going to get those brake lines off. We're going to have to put new brake fluid in anyways, but that's the first step. Now the next step is to get the longest breaker bar in your arsenal. The passenger side is a little bit easier because at least we get to push down. On the driver's side I had to put my feet up inside and use a little bit more leverage. This is on a job like this, you definitely want to start investing into compressed air impact or electric impact even. If you want to get into this kind of stuff, if you want to speed up the process, it's going to make your life a lot easier, but we're going to do it without it anyways. Okay. Oh yeah. Yeah, I gotta make a bunch of dad sounds. The nice thing about this particular breaker bar is it actually lets me go past the straight point. That way I can clear the wheel well easily. So it's not that bad. Like if you have a car that's not super high mileage, or you just take good care of it, it's not that dirty and grimy, or you don't drive in the wintertime, I should say. Well, you guys don't take care of it if you drive in the wintertime. It's going to be a lot easier to crack these off. Okay, try not to make too many dad noises. Wasn't so bad. So the reason why it wasn't too bad, I put a bunch of penetrating lube when I was doing the driver's side. So this had more time to sit. If you were planning on doing this, put the carb in the air, take the wheels off, scope out your job, hit every major bolt with penetrating lube. That way the next day is going to be a lot easier on you. So because we've disconnected our brake line, this thing's kind of just going to fall out now. So we're switching from a floating caliper setup to a fixed caliper. So in 2006, this is an enthusiast. Base enthusiasts, if you don't have Brembo, have floating calipers. Now, what they did do was they upgraded the diameter size, so it's bigger. So if you have compared to a 2003 to 2005 base, you do have bigger brakes. There's nothing wrong with these. You know, if you're just, even if you're canyon carving, these will work. I had stainless steel braided brake lines and Akebono pads. And we did the Z1 brake brace, and you know what? For canyon carving, if we weren't on the brake slot, we didn't suffer from major brake fade. I couldn't really complain about them. The main reason we're doing this is, well, I like to have the added stopping power, and probably my biggest complaint was this car always had poor brake pedal feel. So switching to a fixed caliper is definitely going to help with that pedal feel that we were lacking in, because my truck for some reason always, for whatever reason, GM trucks for the longest time always had really good pedal feel. And when I first bought my 350, I was like, what is this? Like, it's a sports car and it feels horrible. So that's the other reason. Plus it looks cool. So we're just gonna take the whole assembly off very quickly. And then I'm wondering if these rotors will just, yeah, come right off. So I thought it'd be cool to compare and contrast before we put these brakes in. So you can see that the old rotors are significantly smaller than our new ones. These are actually probably smaller than the rear brakes that we put onto this car. What I find interesting though is, for how big this rotor is, this pad is kind of small. This is an Akebono design for it, so it's not touching the whole thing. Probably this one actually does a little bit of a better job for it. It is taller, this one's wider. They both have the groove in the middle for ventilation. One thing I do like about slotted rotors compared to blanks or cross-drilled is it does help clean this off. But these have done well. These haven't been on the car that long, but we don't have a lot of brake dust, but I have seen it where this clogs up with brake dust in here. You notice that the pistons are smaller on our base model compared to our 370 Sport. Keep in mind that's a 4-pot, so there's 2 on each side, while there's only 2 here on the one side. So a floating caliper, it pushes on one and the whole caliper assembly slides over, so it grabs on both sides. So this is where we get our better brake pedal feel, is we have 2 pistons on each side, 4 in total, and they're all kind of clamping at the same time, while on the floating caliper, one side pushes and the other one moves in and out, while we have pistons on both sides on this setup. So it's funny looking at like how giant these parts are. It is more effective, but If you look at these, you'd be surprised that it's not that big of a difference, but the extra clamping force. Also, this is a thicker rotor compared to this one, so this is going to handle heat a lot better. So if we are going downhill and we're not using engine braking for whatever reason, we're using a lot of brake applications, this is going to deal with constant brake applications, especially at the track, way better than this would. Is this going to be the best track option? Maybe for the weekend warrior would be, because the nice thing is this is cheap. Is it as good as like a big brake, like a 6-pot from Willwood or Bear? Probably not, no. But these parts are readily available at the dealership or your local parts store. It's still a very durable setup, and it is proven. So for most of you out there, this is going to be more than enough. And the nice thing is, if you have a part fail, let's say you're building a touring car and you're going long distance. If you have a part fail, you can just go and say, I need this part for a 370. Well, if you had a Willwood kit, you're pretty much out of luck, and you'd have to special order and wait for it. Now, it's highly unlikely you would have failure on brake components, but you never know. Things can happen, and at least if you use stock parts, it's way more readily available. Like those rear rotors I had to buy them because I bought the used. I had the wrong rear rotors for the parking brake. They had them in stock, bought them, and we were able to continue our video nice and easy. Since I have the rotor off, we want to clean the hub. It is in good condition in here, not that much rust, it's just surface, but we do want to take our time, go through it all, and brush as well as we can. There are specialty brushes that you can get that go over these studs, and you put a drill in that does a much better job than what we're doing. So we're going to have to take more time to do this. Now the reason why you want to get rid of the rust, if this is really bad and it was uneven, you would get, especially since we're using ceramic pads, we would get an uneven transfer of material onto the rotor, and that would cause that pulsing. So technically rotors don't warp. It's an uneven amount of pad material, because that's what ceramic actually relies on, is putting a thin layer of material onto the rotor, and then the pad grabs onto that material. Technically, that's how it works. Next, after hitting with brake clean, we're going to put a thin layer of anti-seize. Now, I did this on the front, not the rear, because if this flings around, it's kind of just stuck inside the hub assembly with the brake. This will help keep down corrosion, and I'm really spreading it, and I'm not trying to goop it up. I want to make it as thin of a layer as possible. So I did it for the front, didn't do it for the rear because I'm afraid in the rear, if it flings around, it's going to get on my parking brake assembly, and then my parking brake friction material might get contaminated and not be operable, so that's not a good safety thing, because we do have a remote start in the car. I only remote start the car when it's on flat ground, but still. And also, it is your emergency brake as well, so we want to make sure that it always works. So like I said, only doing it on the front, not doing it on the rear. This is up to you guys. You don't have to do this, but we want to prevent the rotor from being seized onto the hub. If we ever, not if, like when we have to do our next brake job, it's just going to make life a lot easier. So here's the part that makes everything all possible for the front. The rear, we got lucky because Nissan kind of engineered the rear the same, so everything lines up. The front is different because those front calipers are so big, so we have to run an adapter. So we got these from Z1, and I prefer the Z1, not because I deal with them all the time and they're easy to deal with. The reason why I pick theirs is I'll pick whoever has the best product. I pick this one because it is one piece. It's relatively heavy for being billet aluminum or whatever it's machined out of, but it's one piece, which is a much stronger design. There are other manufacturers out there that do two-piece. I don't really trust it nearly as much as a piece engineered as highly as this one. But this is what's going to make life easy, because we don't have to do much to modify this front and to make it all work. So like the rear, the front dust shield does need to be modified. Now I've seen people do it different ways. I've seen people cut off these ears over here because the new caliper won't fit with it. You remove it all completely. I like to bang, so we're going to bang it out. So what I did on the driver's side was I actually just folded this in, and it clears everything. But I also tapped around the outer perimeter here as well, because you have to watch out, because the new rotors are thicker and it will touch, so you have to make sure you have clearance for that as well. So we just have to bang it in just a bit. Wear ear protection when you're doing this. It will be loud, especially if you're in a garage. And then we're going to come across the other parts. So metal kind of has a memory to it, so I'm just going to do light taps all the way around and work the metal. It's really thin sheet metal, so you could just like hit it once, but if you want to help it really work itself over, little taps towards the outside will help it keep its shape. And remember to do the whole thing, because when you pull on one side it can pull on, or push on one side it can pull on another, so the bottom might start to come up, so make sure you have to work the whole thing, and then you'll have enough clearance for your rotor and all the other parts. Before I go any further, I'm going to take my rotor. It is best if you can just put 2 lug nuts on opposite ends so it's really flat, and then test it. So do a visual inspection, look inside, listen. We have no interference, no scratching noise, so we can go ahead and keep on with our job. So our brackets do have instructions, so please, please, please read them carefully. I am paraphrasing in this video because I'm tired. So I am opting to use thread lock. It's not in the instructions. What is in the instructions though is to use the old washer. You're going to reuse that. But I'm opting to put in a bunch of thread lock and torque it down to 75 foot-pounds as the instructions say. And it also suggests when you first put them in to torque them down evenly. And this is like an Allen head bolt. They are quite large. You guys probably will have to invest in a new set. I did when I was working on my truck, that's why I have them. But it's not a tool you're just going to use that often. So that's what I'm saying, you're probably going to have to invest in it, because not a lot of hobbyists are going to have an Allen head that big. I'm also really, I don't know about you guys, but like, it always bugs me if the flat part of the washer, the way they're manufactured, isn't on the mating end. So that's why I switched it around. So we're going to finger tight these all the way, and then we're going to torque it down, and then we can go ahead and put the caliper on. If you guys are just coming off our video where we painted these calipers, you're probably wondering, okay, well, I have used calipers, I have calipers that I've just taken off, and the pistons are pushed in. How do I push the pistons out and not wreck the nice finish that I just spent all this time on? So there's an actual tool for it, and this tool allows us to push the pistons back without wrecking the finish. Now, I actually did the driver's side and I put the caliper on first, and I actually was able to use the tool this way. It's a little bit hokey doing it that way, but you can. In case you're just changing up pads and you don't want to take off the caliper completely, you can do it that way as well. To mount our caliper onto our caliper bracket, Z1 does offer you new hardware. So you can see here it has a locking washer, and they've also provided new washers as well. Okay, OCD kicking in, flat side to the mating surface. You have to use this lock washer. I was looking at it. When the bolt comes through, when the bolt comes through, if you don't use that locking washer, this bolt's probably going to be too long, and it's going to rub right against your rotor. These things are surprisingly light. So again, bleeders up. So this one's going to hang out roughly right here. Okay, so we can now put on our rotor. Now, even though the calipers are lighter, they're significantly lighter, one thing you have to factor in, you're putting on a bigger hunk of steel. So unless you run carbon discs, technically you're going to make acceleration probably a little bit worse. I really don't think you guys are going to notice it, but if we're going to be really technical about it, so if you're building like a drag car, I'd probably opt for 2006 base brakes maybe. It's probably a wash, but it's less rotational mass on those ones, and then just the calipers would weigh more, so I don't know, you guys can pick, but I think this is worth the extra weight, honestly. So we're putting on 2 lug nuts to keep our rotor in place. Make sure we got it all the way on as much as we can. Again, we're going to test it again. No noises. And now for a caliper on, this is the old stainless braided line that the previous owner had on there. So we're going to line that up with our bracket. New hardware. Now I'm opting not to put on thread lock because this is a serviceable piece. And we have that lock washer, and these get torqued down to factory spec. These get torqued down to 98 foot-pounds, so that's pretty tight. As long as you guys are checking your stuff, you should be fine. So, I know a lot of videos that like thread lock glue. Like we even use it to fix the axle shaft issue in these things. But for this part, we're not going to use it. Now that brake shield that I cinched down will touch the caliper a bit. You just have to push it in. I already got it to thread. So now all we have to do is thread them evenly, going back and forth, and then just torque it down to 98 foot-pounds. So these are also 22 mil, which is nice. Now if you guys are going to squeeze the pistons here, leave the brake line off so you squirt out all the fluid. So in case your calipers have a bunch of sediment in them, you don't shoot it back into the system. And now we're just torquing everything to manufacturer specifications. Probably want to come back after a couple hundred kilometers and double check to make sure that everything's tight there. Again, I already had aftermarket banjo bolts on my car, so these are already really short. But new crush washers were installed. And then we can go ahead and cinch these down. Okay, so you're almost done. It's not that bad, right? So we are using actual brake lubricant. It is designed for this application. So I am just going to lightly put a coat of the stuff where the pad needs to slide or makes contact with anything. So we have to do the pad itself. No, not the friction material, we're going to do the back plate of it. This is the one thing I do like about fixed calipers. You just do this. Not too far. You want to try to line up with the holes as best you can. Do not touch the friction material. These guide pins I also do, and also the spring plate. So you can see it's tapered on the sides, so it helps push the pads back in place. Very simple. If yours is kind of beat up, then I would just go ahead and replace it. Like, these kits are cheap. I wouldn't cheap out on these things, but like these are like brand new. They just have some paint on them, so just a little bit of our grease, and then in here too. So when you're done, you want to try to center everything. This part is kind of where it gets finicky, and the rears were better than the fronts because these guys don't have a Phillips on the end. And I liked having the Phillips on the end so I could just throw the pins in, and then I could line up the hole after for the cotter pin. This one doesn't have that. I don't know why. So I have to keep note of the orientation of that when I'm putting it in. So it goes under, then over, then under again. So now we can get our pins in. So we're going to get our lower pin in. I'm trying to keep this hole for the cotter pin as straight as possible. You want to manipulate it a bit. You pushing the pistons in as much as possible is going to help out so much, because then you have more room to play. But that's it. And then you have to go ahead and put those cotter pins right in there and there. That'll hold it in, and all you have to do is bleed the system. We're going to bleed the system in another video, mainly because I'm trying to keep them sectioned in a lot more direct, because some people just want to maybe see how the thing comes apart. Other people actually want to see the bleeding process. So we're going to go ahead and finish putting this together and putting our clips in, double check everything, check for clearances, and we're going to test to see if the wheels fit. Okay, so let's do a close-up now. So we got one cotter pin in. See, this is why I liked having the Phillips, because then you can have the Phillips on the one side and manipulate it. This one you have to be careful. So we have it already in here, so then we have to go ahead and we can push it in. And then once you've manipulated there, you can just use your needle nose and then push it in all the way. And then that's it. Alright, we got our wheel on, and as you can see, it spins. Now we do have a clearance issue, but what is it on? It's on the valve stem of all things. So where's our valve stem? So we can see here, it clears, it clears, it clears, and boop. Yeah, it just touches. So we have to get a shorter valve stem on there. Pretty much, if we could, I even removed, these are like for looks. I removed the sleeve. It's not hitting the sleeve, it's hitting the threads over here. So if I can find something that's shorter, that should solve all my issues. Not a big deal. This is why we try to take on projects like this on not our dailies, because things like this can happen. So yeah, it just clears there, and then it hits here, and then if you guys can see, like, I can just fit paper through there. So there is just enough clearance between the caliper and this rim. So this is a Vossen CV7. It does technically fit, but if you use a regular style valve stem, you're going to have clearance issues. Like if it was like this, it would have been perfectly fine. So maybe I have to find metal ones. I got to talk to the wheel shop. I got to take these wheels off, bring down the wheel shop, and figure out a solution. Not a big deal, but again, you guys learn from my challenges. So these are things you have to look out for. So maybe when you're working on your big brake setup, you bring it down the wheel shop, have them dismount the tire, change out the valve stem. That way when you're done your big brake setup, you go pick up your wheels and put them on. I can't do that. So I want to do this before we bled everything, but I want to show you guys the clearance that we had. So this wheel has like a reinforcement ring over here, and I guess this is where the valve stem come out through. So that's where it gets really close. The actual clearance from here to here is quite a bit, but that doesn't matter. If there's something touching, it's a no-go. So just so you guys can see, things like this is a 19-inch rim. So even on a 19-inch rim, these are huge front calipers, and you might have to watch out for. So just so you know, the Vossen CV7s do technically work with a little bit of modification. Okay, let's check out the rear. So you see much more room. It is a much smaller caliper. So there's our valve stem. Lots of room. So the rears we don't have to really mess around with much. Not a big deal, like I said. These are the challenges when you are doing, aftermarket, and you're putting things on the car that technically weren't designed to be there, but do fit really well. And the Vossens look so good because they don't put the valve stem there. They move it in, so you have a much cleaner look on the wheel. But the compromise, it seems, is when you run bigger brakes that you might run into clearance issues. When I was looking online, a lot of people with Vossens that run big brake kits, just on a variety of vehicles, do have issues, but a lot of people have found solutions with shorter valve stems, so I'm not too worried about it. RT tire, and this is going to be the solution. Alright, got the wheel back from the wheel shop, and that is our solution. So you can see now, totally clears the caliper for the front. I only did this for the front, and I'll show you guys why. Because it is a little bit more of a complicated piece, but the main thing is we have just enough clearance everywhere, just barely clears the caliper there. So, yeah, no room for error on this one, but it worked out. Here is our solution for our valve stem. So you can see here there is a gasket here and here. So this is the outside where the wheel is. This goes on the inside of the wheel. And then there's a nut and a jam nut to make sure it holds it in place. So the only way to actually be able to put air in the tire, you then take this tool, you thread it on, and then it becomes like a normal valve stem, so you can actually fill it up. And then when you're done, take it off, and then you put this cap on. Now, if I were building a hot rod and I had polished wheels or chrome wheels, I would totally have these on here. I think they look awesome. However, because we were building a touring car should be somewhat serviceable, especially when it comes just filling up with air when you're driving on long trips. This little guy, if you were to lose it, you'd kind of be stuck because not every wheel shop is going to deal with this. And I've talked to people that weren't experienced, that did work in wheel shops, and never seen anything like this either. So especially shops that do a lot of weird wheels and clearance issues are going to carry this. So I decided to only put this on the front. I still had to buy it as a set. I didn't really save any money, but because that way, if something goes wrong on the rear, I just fill it up like a normal tire, and I only have to deal with this tool in the front. I'm going to keep this in the car. I'm going to buy a couple more, keep it in the garage, keep it at my shop, keep a few around just in case, something, if this were to ever get damaged or if I lose it. So I don't like this for the serviceability aspect. I think this looks awesome. I do prefer just have a regular valve stem because they're proven. They're on daily drivers on millions and millions of cars. This kind of stuff you don't see too often, but there's just no choice. You could do maybe an angled one, but this is all they had in stock. I think it works great and looks good. So when you're putting parts on a vehicle and having wheels on there that weren't technically designed to be there, then you might run into issues like this. Most vehicles, though, or wheels are going to have the valve stem here. Vossen likes to put them further in, so when you look at the wheel from here, it just has a nice clean look. That's their choice. I'm not going to buy new wheels over a valve stem, so I am totally cool running this stuff.
Remember, in this video, we didn't show us modifying the brake dust shields in the rear. We did show it in the front. So make sure you guys watch my other video where I trim it and I make my vent holes and everything. I decided not to remove it because in case there's debris, it does help block it a bit. It is a touring car, it's a street-driven car, so I decided to maintain it. That was my choice. But you will have to modify it because you can see on the back how much bigger the rotor is, and if you don't take off that lip, it's not going to fit. Well, we didn't show how to bleed the brakes, so I'm going to save that, like I said, for another video, but you will have to bleed the brakes in order for your system to work because you remove those brake lines, a bunch of fluid came out, and even if you just topped it off, you're going to have a bunch of air in the line. So to make the system work properly, make sure you bleed your brakes and refer to our video. As you guys can see, we went with blanks. Well, the main reason is we were buying a used set, so it already came with these, and I had to end up buying rears anyways, like you guys saw before, and they're blanks as well. Blanks, I have to say, you can't go wrong with because they are going to be technically the strongest disc you can buy because they are salt. Well, there's no material removed. And on initial bite, I still argue if they're cold, or you're just driving around and they've had time to cool down, you're not doing a lot of braking. When you initially brake, because there's more surface area, it's probably going to stop technically better than cross-drilled or slotted or a combination of the two. Now, if I were to change these and have my pick, I would go slotted. The reason why I go slotted is it's not because of where the gases go. That's how they were advertised when they first came out. But the pad material is so good now, you don't really have that gas issue where there's a layer of gas that gets between the friction material and the rotor, and then it can't really clamp that well. That was the argument for making cross-drilled and slotted back in the day. But what I do like about it is, one, it does look cool. Two, there's a cutting action. So you do reduce your pad life, but because there's that cutting action, that pad is technically clean, you get a better bite all the time. That's my favorite about slotted, and it's stronger. Cross-drilled, I'm not a fan of because when you wear them out, they are prone to cracking. Cross-drilled and slotted, I just don't like because that's removes so much material. If you think about all those slots and cuts, there's not that much material left for it to grab onto. Does it work? Sure. I think it's just overkill. I like the clean look, so slotted or blanks are the way to go for me.
So what do you guys think? I think this is a fantastic deal. I'm always a big fan of putting bigger brakes that are factory off of one vehicle and putting them with either adapters or they just bolt up onto another one, because that's basically what brakes do. Like, just having bigger brakes gives you more performance. And by using factory parts, it's going to be, if you shop around and you can source out the parts properly, it is cheaper than a traditional big brake kit. But the main thing is the serviceability and the testing. Because it's OEM, it's been through the ringer, it's been tested, we know that they're reliable, we know that they're durable, and for street use it's more than enough. And if we ever need parts, it's easy to find parts. And they look fantastic. Like, I like the white and the red theme that I have going on the car. I wanted to match it. We actually have to run the car now and warm them up after we bleed the system and check everything over, because we need to bake that surface on. If I had all the money in the world, I would probably order these from Z1, because you can get them already coated red, and that coating would be significantly more durable than paint, but paint is cheap and relatively easy. So we're on a budget, we're trying to build this car. So comment below, guys, let me know what you think. Do you like the way it looks? Do you like the way it's set up? Does it make sense to you? Or would you go a different route? Let me know.